what can we do better to counteract, some of these things that these false prophets do? Because the church historically has also been a source of great good for healthcare. Many hospitals in Africa were started by missionaries, right? We cannot discount the fact that Catholic priests and nuns and church workers throughout, our colonial past, especially, provided healthcare, and many of the hospitals are still named after some of these people who, I think were very well-meaning people who did a lot of good things. So religion has had some good effects on people's health historically, but now we have this proliferation of so-called healers and prophets and people who may have ulterior motives. So how does the African scientist, how does the African doctor engage with the African population to help them, and perhaps even engage with religious bodies? But I was just curious what you think we are not doing that we should be doing better to begin to counteract the TB Joshuas of this world.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult one, because when I ask myself, who is the African scientist, who is the African healthcare worker, who is the African doctor? Because there's a healthcare worker who is somewhere in the middle of nowhere running a health facility, who has to see 50 patients every single day, and then perhaps go to the field to vaccinate babies and do all that stuff. So there's a systemic problem that doctors simply don't have time, or nurses don't have time to engage the same way that TB Joshua would engage with somebody who has come to them for help. And I think that's one way of looking at it. The other thing is that the people in churches, or the pastors or the bishops, are very consistent in the way they interact and engage with their clients, if I could call it that. They don't put on a hat and put it off. It's the same hat of, they have a consistent message, they have a consistent way of communicating, and they communicate about something for a long time until it becomes sort of embedded in people's thinking and psyche. Doctors don't do that. They'll call you to talk about vaccination on TV, and then you speak and go back home, and you'll never talk about vaccination again. They ask you to talk about cancer because it's World Cancer Day. You go and speak about cancer, and then you go back home. Because in your day-to-day life, the way you interact with society, you don't have the consistency and the time and the commitment to engage, about cancer as you understand it. So if you go on TV and speak and go home, how many people watch that TV show? Maybe 50,000 in a country. But the people who interact with the TB Joshuas of this world, they are consistently bombarded with the same message about certain things. So if there are 5 messages, by the time somebody interacts with it within a year, they get it. But for us, it's hit and run. It's hit and run. And I wouldn't blame the doctors. I don't think the system is set up in a way that doctors have the time to do that. But on the other hand, the way doctors are trained, the way healthcare workers are trained, we are trained in a certain way. We see things, in black and white. It's yes or no. It's you have diabetes or you don't have diabetes. And I think somehow that training, which is, Eurocentric, takes away the other elements of disease and health and spiritual well-being and well-being generally. And so by the time you finish, you discount them. And yet the patients that we see, the people that we interact with, are in that world. That is part of their world. So our ability to incorporate that in care and to acknowledge that there's a role for them, and not see it as either or, it's either religion that heals or it is medicine that heals, not looking at it as an either or thing. And so we are not trained, we are not oriented in that way. And even outside the issue of religion, I mean, there's something else about traditional healers and all that. Doctors are not trained to engage in a way that is respectful with other ways of knowing, other ways of thinking. They're not trained in that way. You have cancer, and that's it. And this is what is going to happen. If somebody entertains the notion that, oh, I think I'm going to go to my pastor, then you're very stupid. Well, why do you think that? Rather than, yes, I understand, and we can all work together on this. So there's a problem in our training, there's a problem in our orientation, there's a problem of time, there are time constraints, and then there's a problem of lack of consistent messaging. And as I've said, it's not just about religion, it's about everything else. A mother comes to a healthcare facility, they have 5 problems with their baby, and the doctor picks on one. Go to the lab, get an injection, take this medicine, go back home. And yet the mother had hundreds of questions that perhaps were relevant to their child. And that's a missed opportunity. If that child doesn't get better, the mother would go to another healthcare provider. If they go and they get the same kind of treatment and the child doesn't get better, they'll go to a place where someone is going to sit with them for an hour and listen to them and visit them at home and then check on them. And then when they come, they respect them, they listen again. So they will gravitate towards that kind of setup. And that's why, even outside the dichotomy between faith and Western medicine, even within Western medicine, that's why there are quacks who thrive. Somebody doesn't have medical training. They set up a facility somewhere in the village and they're very popular because they are respectful, they take time, they follow up on patients, they call them, they explain, and they take away people from now the non-quack establishments, because the non-quack establishments, people are harassed, they are busy, they are stressed, they are not well paid. So there's a lot that's wrong in the healthcare system. And so it will take really a lot to shift the orientation and then
Mm,
see all these forms of knowing and knowledge as things which are complementary rather than,
mm,
you know, other than contradictory or something like that. Yeah.
mm. I can't help but think that the weight should not only fall on the shoulders of healthcare workers and scientists, and I agree with you on that. And it seems to me that theologians and those who deal in this space of the mystical and have a much larger role to play. I think back at my own kind of evolution in my thinking on faith. Excuse me. Here in the U.S., I went to a very conservative Christian school. I came in with a very strong faith, and I remember studying biology. Where evolution was being taught within this conservative Christian university, right? The Bible department and the biology department were very much at odds with each other. And I remember my biology professors really just kind of sitting down with us in the courses and kind of trying to get us to understand how we can reconcile our
Mm,
faith with the science that we're learning, the foundational science that we're learning in our courses.
mm,
And that really helped me to dive a bit deeper to understand that these things, they don't necessarily need to be at odds with each other. Why do they seem at odds with each other? So that was very helpful. Just having, I mean, in that case, those were professors that helped me, but there were also, I actually had a mentor who was a Bible professor that I would have lunch with almost on a daily basis, and he would on a weekly basis. And so I would meet with him and discuss and say, oh, we're talking about this concept in biology. What do you think of that? Right. And
mm.
that dialogue between the science part with my science professors and the Bible professors really helped me to kind of make sense of it. So I wonder if our educational systems have such a big role to play as well in just getting people to understand, the basics of the science and how you reconcile it with uh, this foundational faith that people have.
Yeah, I would say most definitely, and I think in two ways. I think one way is what you've described. That is there a place for a department within the same educational institute as I said, to help people reconcile those things that seem at odds with each other. I think that is something which could be which is possible. I think what we have currently is that if there's a department of theology, which is quite unusual. You can't find like a department of theology at Makerere University, University of Nairobi. The schools of theology are separate completely.
Mm,
And if there's
mm,
any department of religion, it is that they run the church services on Sunday, and maybe they go and pray for patients, and they have some kind of outreach ministry. But the interaction with people who are learning doesn't happen. Or
mm,
maybe they come in at when they're talking about ethics or something like that. So there's no systematic attempt, as you said, to reconcile those two disciplines or ways of thinking. That's one way in which the education system could help. But for me, fundamentally, I think the education system should be one that enables people to do the reconciliations themselves. That you're trained in a way that you can get one piece of information, get another piece of information, and you have the capability and capacity to interrogate those two different sets of information. You're able to read on your own, find more information, and over time form your own worldview. But I think our education system does not necessarily allow that, because you've probably trained in these countries. It's about get facts, spit them out on a piece of paper, on a computer, pass an exam, and like go through this narrow path of absorbing lots and lots of information, and then regurgitate that information to prove how much you absorbed, during the teaching and during the learning process. And it's not a system that allows people to question. It's not a system that allows people to interrogate, and it doesn't allow people to find alternative sources of information. The teacher, the lecturer is an authority, and we are socialized and trained to see them that way. And so when you come out of school, then you go to church, and then there's the pastor, and there's that. And so we are trained in ways that are very regimental, and doesn't allow us to question these things and maybe try to reconcile them ourselves. And I think that's fundamental. Maybe that would be better, because it can be much more widespread. If our education system is turned on its head, that it produces people who can really think for themselves, and then come to their own conclusion about what it is about them, and what do they believe. There's no right or wrong belief. But at least you should be comfortable with that, and not being boxed and fearing to even look outside, because if you look outside, then you might be seen to be a certain way. So I think that's where the education system could help, really training people who can reconcile different pieces of information and come up with their own view of the world.
No, I agree. I mean, I think this topic is quite personal for me, because both my parents are theologians, and my younger brother and I are both scientists. So in our house, you had two children who grew up in a house where theology was spoken all the time. In fact, my father was a very prominent African theologian, very well known for how he viewed Christianity in Africa. But I think what my parents did was they created an environment that you produce two PhD level scientists who are doing very well in science, because they embraced discussion. It wasn't that science or theology. It was theology is a worldview and a way you think about the world, and science is another, and you can actually interact. And I think, Desmond, what you described is sort of a liberal arts, US liberal arts type education, which is also what I had in college. I also went to a very conservative Christian college, but there actually they taught evolution not in conflict with what the religion professor said. You were actually engaging with it. And I think what Catherine is talking about, that system actually is allowing you to confront, appearance of conflict, which may not be conflict. And I think that is what a good education does, whether it's religion and science or other things. We always confront things that appear initially to be in conflict, but with dialogue, with introspection, you can find lines where there is intersection and where there is room for dialogue and for understanding. And I think it was when we did the podcast with Professor Iruka Okeke, where she talked about how Africa's our colonial education system produced people who can function in the colonies, right? So they wanted people who could be clerks and registrars. It was not producing innovators or thinkers, right? If you think too much, you want independence. So they create robots. And we've not changed. So our education system is regimented. You're a science student. I mean, we get to specialize way too early. You have either a science student or an art student out of like halfway through high school. That is terrible. You should have artists who become scientists and scientists who become artists. So I think I fully engage with that, and I think this TB Joshua example perhaps is almost it's an effect of a system that has produced people who may be very intelligent but are not able to interact with different spheres different worldviews, and so are vulnerable to manipulation by people who are, smooth-tongued and are able to twist, people's beliefs. So I guess the question then is, how do we, how do we move forward? I mean, we do need more interaction. I agree, doctors don't have time to engage, and I think the term we use, spiritual healers, does our medical profession, are they healers or are they treaters, right? They treat your disease, but they don't heal you. Whereas the pastor is seeking to heal you and is addressing many other things. Maybe the baby is hungry because mom doesn't have money to pay food. It's not just that the baby has malaria. And is the doctor going to recognize that? The pastor probably will, because the pastor will talk to you.